Budget Review Subcommittee on Transportation for this interim. This is a very important committee and a very important, this is our biennial road plan will be up for review and passage in this next session. So we've got a lot to talk about and a lot to do. So welcome everyone today. We're getting ready to do roll call. Remind those out that are attending virtually, and the ones in the room, please, when you answer a roll call, to state if you're here in the room or you're attending virtually in your district. So, Madam Clerk, if you will, please call the roll.
Senator Storm.
Present in the room.
Senator Turner.
Present in the room.
Senator Webb. Senator Wise. Representative Fugit. Representative Heverin.
Present in the 18th District.
Thank you. Representative Huff. Representative McPherson. Representative Pratt.
Present in the room.
Representative Roberts.
Present in the room.
Representative Stevenson.
Present in the room.
Representative Upchurch. Co-Chair Santoro. Chair Higdon.
Present in the room. We don't need one. Okay. We do have a quorum, and and we have no minutes to approve, so we'll get right to our agenda. The Secretary Gray and Deputy Secretary Hancock, welcome. Thank you all for being here today. And the floor is yours, and I know you have a lot to report to us. So, and we'll have a lot of questions. So, this is a good time, and I want to encourage everyone on the committee. There is no such thing as when we're talking about the budget. There is no dumb questions. I'm new to being the transportation chairman. I have a lot of questions, and I know a lot of the members. This is probably your first time to go through a budget for the transportation, so a lot of questions. And the best way to we have the crew here that can answer any question we have. If they brought Kenny Bishop along, if they can't answer it, Kenny can.
I'm glad.
Sir. But I do want to encourage the committee to ask questions, because we've got a couple hours set aside for this. It is important that we understand where the dollars come from and where they go, and the budget process. And it is you think it's a long way off, but I assure you that the Transportation Cabinet is already working on the budget that they will present to the governor. And we don't know how much it'll look like what they present to the governor when it comes out the other side, but the more conversations we have, the more likely it'll look like something they recognize. So that's a good thing. So, Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know whether your colleague and your co-chair is remotely with us or not, but I was going to say he is under repair. We understand. Is that correct?
That
Right.
is correct, and we wish him that. I know he'll do well today, but he is getting a slight repair.
Well, we understand
today.
what that's like in transportation. So, well,
It's like fixing a pothole.
well, whatever you want to describe. I'm glad you also mentioned Kenny Bishop, because in the last couple of sessions I've been in, and Kenny was with me, I failed to do just that. And I don't know what the repercussions are to it, but I promised him that I was going to repair that failure today. And thank Kenny for being here and for doing the good work that he does with the legislature all the time.
Now, if any of the representatives and senators here, Kenny, stand up there.
Yep.
Kenny is our liaison to the Transportation Cabinet, and trust me, he will answer your phone call day or night, whether you're calling about billboards or potholes. He will answer the phone, and so I just if you don't have his information, you can get it from me, or you can see him after the meeting. But he is our liaison, and like I said, he does a great job. So, Kenny, I just want everybody to know Kenny Bishop.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for punctuating that. You helped me out a lot in getting that repair done. I'm also very thankful. We're very thankful for the opportunity to be with you all today again to give you a transportation update. And of course, as you said, Mr. Chair, I am joined by a familiar face to many of you, and that is Deputy Secretary and former Secretary Mike Hancock. And then following Mike's presentation and mine, you're going to hear from Bobby Joe Lewis, our Commissioner for Rural and Municipal Aid. And I want to say, too, that I think Mike and I share this, and others do, that she is doing a great job. She brings a lot of passion to her work, and she comes from having county experience as a county attorney in Anderson County. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, I want to throw in one thing on Bobby Joe's behalf, and new members to the committee and all members of the committee. She's another one you need on speed dial, because I promise you, your county judges have her on speed dial, so you need to know her also. She's a integral part of the transportation system, and a lot of the questions you have about rural and secondary roads, Bobby Joe can answer it. And you hear this word discretionary funds. She can help you understand discretionary funding. And sorry for the interruption, Mr. Secretary.
That's the way I hoped we could start off, by you're interrupting me at least once or twice. Okay. That's essential. No, I appreciate it. Well, the last time that I was before this committee, we were here under really very different circumstances. I was providing then an update on the string of weather challenges that we often describe as disasters that occurred this spring due to the severe storms that really created havoc on roads across the state. Thankfully, we're on the brink of summer now, and our highway crews and staff have shifted their focus from cleanup to construction, to maintenance, and to new construction projects as well. Now, as you know, the highway plan, the state highway plan, serves as our roadmap to track transportation projects that the state would like to pursue, and that those projects span from planning, from original concept all the way through construction. I sometimes say that a good plan is like a roadmap, and the better the plan, the safer the trip, the safer the journey. The better the roadmap, the safer the journey. And that's what the highway plan really represents, a roadmap. We're here today at your request to shed a little light on a unique section of the highway plan that is uniquely titled Z Various, and also to discuss how our MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and the contingency account projects are determined. And that's where you're going to hear from Mike on the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, the MPOs, and on the contingency account projects, we're going to hear from Bobby Joe. I'll start by going over the Z Various funds, and then I will turn it over to Mike, as I said. And Mike will talk about the MPO and contingency projects, how they are selected. First, so a little background on the term Z Various. It's really not all that unique. It was coined many years ago. Actually, I asked this same question myself about a year ago. How in the world did you come up with that name, that title? Well, it was coined when the legislature required that the Transportation Cabinet submit our recommended biennial highway plans in two separate sections. The first section of projects was alphabetical by county, Adair to Woodford. That's how Mike's got a copy of it right there. Adair starts out with Adair County, It goes all the way to Woodford. So you can find Representative Stevenson, you can find Fayette right in there, and others. And you have, yes. The second section consists of projects or programs that may affect various counties. Now, frankly, to get the various list to print at the end of the county-specific listing, we added the Z to make Z various projects appear last in the highway plan after Woodford. That's how it's there. So that's why Z various. We also identified these projects as Highway District 99 to ensure that they still printed last in any district-by-district extraction of the data. So now you have the story behind that unique name. So the Transportation Cabinet has learned over many years of putting together these highway plans that not all federal and state-funded activities fit the mold for listing as a specific project in a specific county. For instance, on page 1 of the Z various section of the 2020 enacted highway plan, you will find project descriptions such as statewide intelligence transportation systems activities. The acronym for that is ITS, statewide intelligent transportation systems activities. And you will find statewide transportation enhancement and statewide congestion mitigation and air quality improvement funded projects. Along with these descriptions is an amount of anticipated federal funds for each fiscal year. For each of those federal programs, there are statewide programmatic eligibilities that drive that funding category. The Cabinet's list of federal Garvey bond payments to pay down debts for projects like the new bridges in Louisville, the Garvey bond payments, are also tracked in this section, in the Z various section. Z various funds also allow KYTC, the Transportation Cabinet, to set aside funding for unforeseen needs that may come up above and beyond the specific projects identified in the project listing of the highway plan. You can actually think of the Z various section or account as the emergency fund your family may store away for unexpected car repairs or to fix the furnace that breaks down in the middle of the winter. Some examples of funding reserves that we plan for can be found on page 1 of the Z various section of the 2020 enacted highway plan. The first item on the page is for bridge repair for various bridges, and the last item on the page is for pavement rehabilitation on state non-rural secondary system routes. Bridge repairs and pavement rehab are Z various items assigned an amount of funding each year to address specific emergency issues we expect to occur but don't know when or where they will happen. Now, put this in the context of a $2.5 billion total transportation budget. That's the context. So when we talk about these funds or these buckets, it's really within the context of that overall budget. And some of these amounts, for example, FD 39, the contingency account, that represents a little under 0.1% of the total budget at $20 million, which was $10 million more than we got in the first round. Right, Senator? Right, Chairman? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right.
And that was and because you needed it.
Yeah, right.
There was a real need in Eastern Kentucky, and I see Rocky shaking his head. It was, but that. Thank you. That is important that money's in there.
Right. So to summarize it and recap it, the Z various primarily consists of projects with a defined federal program amount that has not yet been assigned to specific projects, and it consists of projects we've been able to reasonably estimate as recurring that must be anticipated, such as ever-changing emergency repairs to pavement and bridges. Okay, so that's the Z various, and now let me turn it over to Mike to briefly describe how the Mpos, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, how they determine their projects and the funding associated with them. So, Mike?
All right, thank you, Secretary. On the MPO side of the ledger, there are 9 MPOs in Kentucky, 5 of which are greater than 200,000 population. And those actually receive those 200,000 population and above.
Mike, excuse me a second. Turn your microphone on, please.
Sorry, let me go back and start over. There are 9 MPOs in Kentucky, 5 of which are greater than 200,000 population. And those 5 actually receive dedicated STP funds from the federal government. Those 5 are Louisville, Lexington, Northern Kentucky, Henderson, and Ashland. Henderson because it's part of the Evansville MPO, and Ashland because it's part of the Huntington-Ironton-Ashland MPO. The other 4 MPOs that are between 50,000 in population and 200,000 in population do not receive specific funding, but are nonetheless important to how we look at our transportation programs around the state. Those 4 are Bowling Green, the Clarksville, Tennessee, Oak Grove, Kentucky area, Elizabethtown and Radcliffe, and then Owensboro. So as you can see, our more populous communities across the state are those that are classified as metropolitan planning organizations or have that designation in their area. Federal transportation legislation requires that an MPO be designated to carry out the metropolitan transportation planning process for each of those urbanized areas that have a population of at least 50,000. It is important to know that each MPO produces its own long-range transportation plan, and it produces its own short-term transportation improvement program, known as a TIP for short. The TIP provides an overview of how transportation revenues will be invested over a 6-year period by state and local agencies that have responsibility to build, operate, and maintain the community's highway, street, and public transit systems. Inclusion of transportation projects in the TIP is required for the project to receive federal funding. Because highway projects are divided into phases, you have design, right-of-way, utilities, and construction phases, that TIP schedule at these MPOs guarantees or controls or processes the timing of the individual project priorities and activities. The projects listed in each MPO's TIP are adopted into the KYTC prepared statewide transportation improvement program. This is something that's required by the Federal Highway Administration and is something that we prepare, the Cabinet prepares on the heels of the enacted highway plan every 2 years. So we take the legislative direction that we receive and turn it into the federal document that governs all projects that we're engaged in across the state. That STIP, as I said, is created every 2 years, and it also includes by reference, it incorporates by reference those 9 transportation improvement programs for the MPOs from across the state. KYTC works with all of the MPOs to develop area projects, but the 5 large MPOs that receive the direct annual federal funding allocations from Congress are treated differently. For those MPOs with dedicated funding, they are the ultimate authority on the use of the funds that are dedicated to them. KYTC includes the 4 smaller MPO projects in our highway plans, since those projects typically will be using statewide funds. MPOs that receive the dedicated federal funds, the Cabinet once tried to just mimic those projects, go ahead and drop those into our highway plan and show them in our biennial highway plan as we did that each year. But the MPOs themselves had objection to that. They did not appreciate either the state or the legislature adjusting the priorities for what they perceived to be their dedicated federal funding. As a result of that, several years ago, KYTC began reporting just the amount of money that was dedicated to these large MPOs each year from the federal STP pot. And that turned out to be, for them and for us, less confusing in the long run. MPO projects usually require a local match of 20%. A total of about $32 million a year in federal STP funding is allocated for Kentucky's 5 largest MPOs, and that's a total of $32 million for all 5, not 5 times 32. It's $32 million for all 5, but it's allocated for those 5 MPOs to spend on regional projects with about $8 million annually provided in matching funds, and the majority of those matching funds come from that local government. Now moving to the contingency account, I have, and I'm not quite sure how we need to do this today, and I know Bobby Joe's here to talk about some things, so I have just a very brief overview of this, and then Bobby Joe, I don't know if they're going to want to hear you separately. I suspect they will. But what I'll do is just do a very brief overview and then turn it back to the secretary, and then you all can use all 3 of us for the question and answer. To round out today's presentation, just briefly let me summarize how projects funded by the Cabinet's contingency account are selected. The General Assembly sets the amount of contingency account funding, and the project selection criteria is defined through the annual or the biennial budget process. The final biennial transportation budget that's passed every 2 years tells us how much money we have to work with in our contingency account and how we can go about using it. Examples of projects include those that require emergency repairs, pose safety concerns, or support economic development like constructing industrial access roads. As the Secretary mentioned in the beginning of his remarks, the weather in the first quarter of this year was harsh on our infrastructure. These funds allowed us to respond to critical funding requests like resurfacing deteriorated roads. As he mentioned in the discussion about the Z-Various account, it's essential that the Cabinet have some flexibility within the budget and the highway plan to be responsive to unforeseen needs. The contingency account gives us the ability to do that, just as the Z-Various account does in many ways on the other side of the project ledger. So with that, Secretary, I don't know if you want to pick up there or include Bobby Joe?
We could probably take some questions. I'll just say in conclusion that I want to underscore one more thing, something that Mike just said, and we both alluded to this, that I've discovered this in the 15 months I've been in this job. It's really not unlike my own experience in the construction industry, and that flexibility is a key, especially when you're trying to predict something as unpredictable as construction and engineering costs. So that flexibility is a key. Now, too much flexibility, of course, can be a bad thing. I think it was, I'll come back to that. But whether it's the Z-Various funding pot or the contingency account, the Cabinet needs the ability to be responsive to needs that you and your constituents bring to use every single day. And we appreciate that acknowledgement, that recognition, that flexibility that's needed to a certain extent. And your support of those efforts that we try to engage to respond to your needs. So we'll gladly entertain any questions that you all may have now, and then we can move on to Bobby Joe.
Be good.
Okay, we do have questions. Representative Roberts.
Hi, gentlemen. Deputy Secretary, I believe this question is for you. On the MPOs, can you just explain to me the federal funding that comes through? Is that through OKI? Is that how that happens?
The way the federal funding process works is Congress enacts a Federal Funding Authorization Act, a reauthorization in the case coming up soon. But the money they enact flows down to the state, and as it comes to the state, it's divided into several buckets. And the state gets a bucket of funds, as do the MPOs, these metropolitan areas. And for Northern Kentucky, OKI is the holder of that bucket for Northern Kentucky funds. Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to get my arms around MPOs, what comes first, the chicken or the egg in this case? Do we, I guess, as we do our shift projects and we know what the transportation needs are for, say, Louisville area or Fayette County, do the MPOs look at our list and say, okay, we want to do another section of the Gene Snyder, or do they make up their own list? How does that work, and how does it work planning wise if they don't want our input and they don't want it listed, but they want us to contribute money to it? How does all that come together? Because it would look like if they're asking us for a matching funds, that we would have at least have an idea what the process.
Absolutely, and there's a lot that goes into this process. And let me just say right off the top that federal law requires that these MPOs have certain ranges of authority as it relates to local prioritization. So that's how they are designated and get involved in the game. The Transportation Cabinet for projects in a metropolitan area, we have to work through the MPO to get our projects included in that local tip. That's required by federal law. But by the same token, the local government cannot tell us to spend any of our state money in their metropolitan area. I like to say that we both have veto authority over the other's programs, which means that it works best when we're working in concert, when we share common goals and common ideas. Our SHIFT program is done independently from the metropolitan area planning process, but we both take into account the prioritization process that each uses. So, for instance, Metropolitan Louisville may have a list of priorities that they are thinking about pursuing. They will look to the cabinet and see what our list of priorities looks like for the Metropolitan Louisville area to help inform ultimately what they decide about how to prioritize. And not small in that prioritization is the realization that the Transportation Cabinet often brings big dollars to projects that the local MPO process simply can't bring to bear. So we have to work together. We work in concert, whether it's long-range planning, short-range planning, preparation of highway plans and tips and STIPs and all that stuff. It all works hand in glove, and we make a great effort at the cabinet to participate in those MPO activities, to keep them clearly advised of priorities that the General Assembly sets so that they understand how other aspects work within their region. And together we work that out. Typically with regard to matching funds, if a project is done in a metropolitan area and it's on a state-maintained system, typically the state will provide the matching funds. If it's a local street or local road, a county road, then the locals will provide the matching funds. So we've worked out an arrangement over time that honestly has served both well, which is exactly what the Federal Highway Administration is hoping will happen in that whole realm. So difficult, but it works.
Well, can you give us some examples? I guess we're looking at, if you're looking at 32 million going to 5 counties,
Yes.
we're not building any bench bridges with this
Right.
money. So an example, maybe in Jefferson County, Fayette County, Northern Kentucky, some of the projects that they would use this money on, maybe dollar amounts, if you know off the top of your head. It's just I'd like to be more familiar with how this process works.
Sure, and there's again a lot of breadth and depth, and when you get right down to it, it's those federal dollars that flow. For instance, of that 32 million in federal funds, I believe it's 18 million or thereabouts goes to Louisville and to metropolitan Louisville. Metropolitan Louisville actually includes parts of Bullitt County and Oldham County, so it's a bigger area than just Jefferson County. So when the MPO planning process takes place, you have representatives from Jefferson, Bullitt, and Oldham counties all present Metro Louisville is the primary person, Jefferson County. So you have those three entities that go through their prioritization process. Typically, the projects are not large. They may, on occasion, come to the state and say, we need to do a project on a state road that we realize is going to cost $20 million. Here's $3 million of metropolitan money that you can apply toward that project and, help us in that way. But quite often those MPO priorities and projects originate locally. They're on local roads and streets, address a lot of primarily local concerns, and that's the reason that they objected when we were including those projects in the road plan and moving, potential was there for some of those priorities to be moved, that they were objecting because their own prioritization processes and the inputs of metro councils and other regional entities in OKI, you've got, all of the counties and local governments associated with that. And to the extent that those priorities started moving around in our highway plan, that created considerable angst for those local governments that had worked so hard to get their projects in line, if you will. So it's a very broad and deep subject, and I hope I've hit it at a high level that helps. But
I can footnote just a minute,
sir.
Mike. I was on the MPO before I was mayor, when I was on the city council in Lexington, the MPO for Lexington and Jessamine County. And what I remember most, there was a fellow named Max Conyers who was the director of the MPO. Max, a great guy. And my frustration was that we didn't have hardly any money at all to work around with. There were really minor projects, signaling perhaps on Nicholasville Road and opportunities like that. But the list of needs, or the list of wants, was this tall, and the availability was about like that.
I guess you're having a similar experience now, correct?
Yeah, there's some precedent for it. Yes, sir.
The only thing additional I would say is in a prior life, many years ago, as I was sort of growing up through the transportation cabinet, I actually worked on the MPO side from the Division of Planning, and so I got very familiar with how MPOs function, and then later was the Deputy State Highway Engineer for Planning and Program Management, and again saw many of those processes we just talked about in play. And it's an amazing process when it works very well. It can be a frustrating process when it doesn't work very well, but fortunately we have a lot of great people across the state, from Bowling Green to Owensboro to Louisville, Northern Kentucky, all of those folks, Lexington, that really help us keep that program leaning forward. So it's good.
Well, it helps me better understand, hopefully, the members of the committee that, we like to understand these pots of money and how they're used, and 32 million, like I said, that puts it in perspective. Now when we drive down, many of us, we drive down the Gene Snyder repairs that from Taylorsville Road to all the way out to I-71, we know that's not an MPO project. So that helps me better understand. So I appreciate that explanation, and hopefully the members of the committee better understand it also.
Mr. Chairman, this is something I just happened to think of that might just make an offer. We had talked about this earlier, that and there's always new members of the legislature, and I've learned very quickly how Byzantine, that's the best language I could use, is the funding sources and the mechanisms for transportation. The federal relationships, federal highways. And we've done this before, we could schedule another sort of a orientation to that. Ron Rigney and Mike are the best at it. They understand how the Byzantine nature of it, but can translate it into often lay terms, and we'd be happy to do that if you all would like to.
And we'll take you up on that.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
The freshman chairman here and the other newer members to the committee can probably use all that information that you all would share. And I
Okay.
know that you have some real brain trust, especially Ron Rigney, that can really help us better understand it.
After
and
I
the
was
process.
asking him questions for about 6 months, he said, Federal Highways used to have a training program in the funding system, and they don't do it anymore. So, well, that's just so they can keep people like me confused, I guess. I don't know.
Well, we will schedule a meeting. We'll
Okay,
get,
good.
We'll
Let's
do
do
that.
it.
And okay, does that conclude? Are you ready for more questions?
We'll do more questions.
Any
whatever
other?
you-
We have more questions from anyone? I have several. Hopefully we're not. I don't want to steal the show, but I do have a lot of questions. Back to Z Various. Talking about Z Various and pavement maintenance is part of Z Various. And I know we in this budget, current year budget, we supplemented that. Can you talk about pavement management or pavement maintenance? What does the M stand for? Maintenance or management?
It's pavement management too.
Okay.
You go ahead. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
wait. I'm gonna get the terminology right. So that's part of Z Various. Would you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure.
And also how we're using this additional monies.
Okay. In the highway plan, you will see the acronym PM, which does stand for pavement management, and we say pavement management because there are degrees of pavement rehabilitation that we do. We do some very preliminary preventive type maintenance that is typically low cost that we use to try to extend the life of our pavements, particularly on our interstates and parkways and primary routes across the state. So that preventive maintenance is very critical to our program. Then we have pavement repairs. There are roads, I'm sure you've driven them all over the state, where down the center line, you'll see the cracks that are forming in the center line. Quite often, we don't need to dig up the entire pavement and replace it. We need to come back in and repair that center line strip. And so you'll see repairs that are also featured in this plan under PM. Third area is rehabilitation, where we come in and it's a little more in depth. A lot of times you'll see a machine go in and mill off the top 2, 3, 4 inches of pavement and then put down a new pavement. And that's called rehabilitating that old pavement, turning it into something new. And then the final thing that can fit under PM type projects is a complete replacement of the pavement. Sometimes you get roads that are just beyond any sort of repair or fixing, so you have to come in and just completely virtually dig them out and rebuild the road. So those are all types of improvements that fit under that PM category. Fortunately, we have very few of those roads that we have to completely dig out and replace. Most of what you see in this plan is preventive maintenance. There are repair projects that are occasionally here, and then on our interstates and parkways, you'll see a lot of pavement rehabilitation, where we're milling off the surface pavement and putting back new pavements. That is incredibly expensive work. I should have double-checked before coming over here what our latest cost per mile is, but at one time, our cost per mile, depending on where you were, what area, and what you were doing, could vary anywhere from $1.5 million to $5 million a mile to replace pavements or to rehabilitate pavements out there. So that's why you see us a lot of times spending smaller amounts on preventive maintenance to try to help those pavements last as long as they can, because with your household budget, I mean, you just can't afford those big hits year after year after year. If you can spread those out, it's really helpful. So the pavement program, I think, is on the order of, in this plan, is probably on the order of $150 million a year, something in that regard. Our pavement experts in the cabinet are telling us that we need much more than that, that we could probably use at least $300 million a year is a good round term. They would probably argue they could use more to keep our pavements in the best shape. But that's where, Mr. Chairman, the money you talked about, some additional allocations in that direction over this past spring have been incredibly helpful. Our interstates and primary parkway pavements, all of those are in need. The potholes, Senator Turner yesterday was talking about a pothole on our primary pavement system out here on Versailles Road and I-64. And when you have those situations popping up on your interstates, you simply have to be able to respond at a moment's notice. We have a lot of projects identified under PM in the road plan, but then you'll also see some additional money in Z various just to give us the ability to be responsive to those specific issues when they occur. So just a little bit of an overview there. Happy to dig deeper if you like.
For the committee also, and we all get calls about roads that need to be paved. And we've had this conversation before, and hopefully you've got updated numbers for us that, there's a schedule for paving highways, and I know you inspect them. Your district offices inspect roads and make recommendations. And I remember a figure several years ago that, 8 to 12 years, it was, most all roads in the system would be paved. And as we get calls now, and those dollars, those 2011 dollars, we're still getting the same dollars as I tell folks when they call me. The tax is the same today as it was in 2011. I might be fudging that a little bit. It was 25.9 cents in 2011. It's 26 cents today. Miles driven is way up, but consumption has remained level because we have more fuel-efficient vehicles. Mr. Secretary, some people have electric vehicles. You might have heard that. And we're not.
Mr. Chairman, I say I shouldn't get by with not paying the way others do. That's what we talked about. Yes,
I wasn't throwing you under the bus there, Mr. But as you know, those dollars, we're saying, you're saying your experts say we're doing 150 million. We should be doing 300 million plus.
Yes, sir.
What is it? Do you know? Could you tell us what the average time frame now? It used to be 8 to 12. What it is currently? How often are we resurfacing our roads today compared to what we were doing several years ago?
The time frames are, and Mr. Chairman, you put it perfectly. I mean, as the monies either hold steady, decrease, or don't keep up with the pace of inflation, our ability to address needs, and particularly as prices increase, and we've seen that too over the last few years, but our ability to keep up with the needs decreases, and what that does is it lengthens the paving cycle rather. And on the interstate parkway and the primary side of the ledger, I mean, we are seeing cycles that are still probably in the 10 to 12 year paving cycle range, only because we are allocating a majority of the money in that direction on our state secondary system out there, and certainly on Bobby Joe's rural secondary system. We are seeing paving cycles that can go anywhere from 12 to 15 years regularly, and it's just a matter of not having the money to adequately spread across all of the needs that are identified. And I want to speak to the needs side of that too, just a little bit, because from the needs perspective, it's one thing to have people recommending projects to you. It's another thing to have a process that actually evaluates and determines what should be relative priorities. We actually have very detailed equipment in our Division of Maintenance that actually is driven along every mile of road, state-maintained road in Kentucky. And that very scientific equipment is yielding results that tell us the condition of these pavements all across the state. So we have a relativity base, if you will, about the condition of pavements that we then use to try to schedule our preventive maintenance applications, our repairs, and our rehabilitation or replacement schedules. That's how everything is driven, is on the basis of the relative need, the relative index, if you will, that a particular pavement has compared to other pavements of its type. So all of that is very scientifically figured out, and the projects that pop up in this plan are the ones that rise to the top. And we take the funding down that list as far as we can and then draw a line. And those are the ones that are in here, and then anything else we try to accommodate through Z various as it pops up, and just roll forward.
Does the cabinet have a, I guess, do you accumulate and have a scorecard or report card of the changing of the condition of payment? Are we improving? Are we going back? And if you do have that, can you share that with us?
Yes, sir. We do have it, and we can share it. Yes, sir. Be happy to do that in a future meeting or at your convenience. If you want, I can send it to you.
Well, if you would send it to the members of the committee, I'd appreciate it. The Transportation Committee and the Budget Review Subcommittee. It would be good to see that. I don't want to. We're on Z various, so there's other questions, and hopefully some of the other members will appreciate me asking some of these. I'm not trying to bore them to death or keep you here too long, but talk about the discretionary portion of Z various and some examples of what that money's used for. I know we touched briefly on it, but just some actual examples of contingency money.
We'll just dive in. Well, that's the question. Are we looking at Z various amounts, or are we looking at the FD39 contingency account?
Well, to explain the difference, that'd be a
Okay.
good place to start, because
Good.
I can't make a decision. I don't know.
All right, awesome. There are two distinctly different ways of approaching the needed discretion that the cabinet has. One on the state-funded side, as I mentioned through our budget process, we have the Secretary's contingency account that he can use for emergencies and safety issues that pop up through the course of a biennium, and you provide those monies to him through the biennial budget, and he's able to execute those or use those dollars in ways that he and Commissioner Lewis keep very fine track of. I mean, detailed track of where those dollars go. So on the one side, you have those state funds that can be used in that way. On the other side, we have a combination of state and federal funding that is set aside, if you will, through this Z various category to address a variety of things. They typically fit into two pots. We're either three pots, actually. You're creating or setting up a situation where, let's say, the Transportation Enhancement Program. Many of you have heard about that. Where we do transportation enhancement projects, there's an application process for that, and projects are submitted and selected and go through a federal process to make sure we have good projects for that category. In the Z various account, we will set up just a single project that says transportation enhancement funding, and for each year of the biennium and the out 4 years, we will have money listed that goes into that transportation enhancement program. So part of that discretion, if you will, revolves around the execution of that program in accordance with all the federal laws associated with it. So that's one thing. Another thing that we do, Secretary mentioned that we set aside money in Z various to account for bridge repairs, pavement repairs, and other unforeseen things that come our way. And those are the way that we respond to projects like earlier this biennium, we had a bridge on the Spencer-Anderson County line that was closed, had to be closed overnight, and we had to muster the resources to go out and replace that bridge on an accelerated schedule.
It was in my district, by the way. Thank you.
All right, but the only way we could get to that project quickly was using that Z various account in the road plan in order to make those monies come together quickly to get that done, and we've done it for other projects, other bridges around the state where we've had those emergency closures. So you have those kinds of things that we accommodate as well. This account is also used for things like our statewide bridge inspection money that we have to set aside each year to enable our engineers to go out and inspect every single bridge in the Commonwealth. Every bridge in the Commonwealth gets inspected at least every other year. On our major interstate and parkways, we inspect them every single year because they typically carry more traffic. So we have those kinds of things that are covered under Z-Various as well. And then the other thing I would point out is, the Secretary mentioned this too, as far as debt service on projects like the Louisville bridges, like the two big bridges down in western Kentucky over Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake. I was trying to remember, we have some ongoing debt service from some I-65 work that we did a few years ago. So those things also all get characterized under Z-Various to account for that debt service payment in our overall flow of federal funds. So many things go into this account. Mr. Chairman, this is something the Secretary and I talked about before this meeting. If it would help at all, again, this is one of those things we would be happy to sit down with the committee at any point, or sit down with a representative of the committee or staff and go through every single one of these Z-Various line items so that you completely understand what we're attempting to do.
Well, the better we understand I really appreciate that. Representative Stevenson has a question.
So in talking about those, and you talked about the bridge had to be closed overnight. So when we're in an emergency situation and there's severe flooding and the governor or the president declares an emergency, are there funds that come from that emergency declaration that we don't have to use these funds, or is that included here?
You're exactly right. There are funds that we receive from FEMA that can be used in those instances. And typically what happens is the Transportation Cabinet, because the repairs are needed immediately, we have to run to the scene with state money, make the repair, and then go through this protracted process with the federal government and FEMA to get our money back. And so that's, we also have emergency relief funds on the federal highway side that are a lot cleaner in terms of being able to use and get reimbursed for. A great relationship with federal highways to get that done. FEMA is, it's a process that is unlike any other, and issues on both sides of the ledger. We're not throwing rocks at them. A lot of times we have difficulty getting all of our facts together. So it's
we always have a what amounts to an account receivable from FEMA.
I don't want to keep going too long on Z-Various, but I do. There are other categories. I know we recently did. There's school turn lanes and issues like that. Can you tell us some other categories that might come about that falls under Z-Various in that appropriation?
Sure. And the one that the school turn lanes were associated with what we call our highway safety improvement program, and in our typical highway plan, you will see the HSIP projects as a line item as we put the projects forward in the plan for each year, and it's a federal category that the federal government makes a certain amount available to us for safety improvements all across the state each year. We actually have a staff dedicated to those who work hard to put those projects in motion. As we were putting together the 2020 highway plan, 16 months ago, we decided to add some state funds, state-funded component or additive, if you will, to that highway safety improvement program to look at school safety issues. I mean, every district and every chief district engineer has been telling us about issues with school safety all across the state from day one. And I know we used to see them routinely many years ago as I grew up through the process. And we always tried our best to solve those problems under some category that we had at our disposal, quite often even going to the contingency account to pull out a few dollars to help with an issue. So when we had these dollars available to us, as we looked at at school safety and what kinds of improvements, what kind of what could we do to help schools better accommodate traffic in their area, protect not only people dropping off students, but the school kids themselves on buses, and putting up the signs that say "buckle up, phone down," all of those things, trying to get the attention of our driving youth. I mean, all of those things seem to fit neatly into this category. So we canvassed our districts and gathered a list together of those projects that were most known and important to them, and then built a program around that to address school-specific issues using that money that was set up in this particular account. So I think at the end of the day, we have a list of very good projects. I think I've heard one school system say, well, you tackle one of our priorities, but that wasn't our most important priority. So we're probably going to have to go back to the well on that one. But there are many, many, many good projects across the state that we feel great about. So.
Okay, any other questions on this topic? And we'll do this every month, Mr. Secretary, and just talk about, in future meetings, we'll talk about shift and how you all will incorporate that into your road plan, and how legislators need to understand the shift project and the projects in their district that are included in shift. They need to be very, very knowledgeable of that, because we're going to see that's the reason the shift program is in place, that we don't have bridges to nowhere. We have projects that the folks back home that have gone through a proven process. So with that said, and seeing no questions, we'll move on to our next topic, and get Bobby Joe Lewis to come forward and talk about Department of Rural and Municipal Aid. And Mr. Secretary, I should have said that if y'all had any closing remarks.
No, I was just going to say, it's just a footnote to, sometimes the language, and Bobby Joe's going to speak to this too, but the FD 39 account, which is called the Secretary, or I think also AKA, also known as Secretary's Discretionary Account. Well, I just want to say to y'all that word discretionary is really misnamed, because when county judges call, or mayors call, or Representative McPherson, you know what I'm talking about when you call about that. There's not much discretion when you got a bridge out. There's not much discretion when you've got an emergency. And even, for example, there's an economic, in your language, in the language of the legislative language, provides for economic development as part of this $10 million annual fund that we use. And that has meant a turn lane, for example, to an access for an industrial park, where a company may have been looking and considering location. And that meant that the cabinet, from the Economic Development Cabinet, is asking for consideration for this request, and that comes over to the Transportation Cabinet. And that may be a $250,000 or $500,000. So just bear in mind that out of that $10 million, there are an enormous load of requests. And every one of if it's a paving project, they all get examined by engineers in the district to determine the severity of the repair needed. So it goes all the way from what is it, Bobby Joe? Mike? I know that the only ones that we really looked at are 8s, 9s, and 10s, which are the worst case. So I just want to say thank you for the discretion and the flexibility you all gave us with that little bit of money. And earlier I got my digits wrong. I said 1/10 of 1%. It's actually closer. That $10 million is closer to half of 1% of the annual expenditures of the cabinet.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we this money is very important, and been around as long as I have. I've seen a lot of times when that request was made for discretionary money or that emergency money was needed, not in a 6-year road plan, but right now.
Right.
And that's something that the legislature has to continue to do, and trust that you all will spend the money wisely, and you do. And Sarah, and that's how you get your requests, is from our districts, and we appreciate that. We want to make sure we continue to properly fund it. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to publicly thank the Secretary we had a situation over there in my district where we had the Amish community that was served, and they were going to ford the creek if we didn't fix that. And we were going to have a very rough situation here, and we were, that's the area where they raise a lot of produce, and that's their livelihood. And we got him on the phone, and he was very gracious by that afternoon, we had it back on track. And I sure appreciate it.
That was clearly a safety issue that needed to address.
Well,
And that's how we did. Thank you.
we thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your service. And Bobby Joe, I would tell a little story the first time I met you.
Okay.
She said you probably know me. You've probably talked to me on the phone. I was the county attorney in Anderson County. I talked to a lot of legislators. And if y'all don't catch the point there, she talks to a lot of legislators. There was a lot of speeding tickets going through Lawrenceburg, and Bobby Joe got to talk to a lot of legislators over the years. Fortunately, I was not one of them.
And that's exactly what he said.
So that was the first time we had met. I had not met her for a pretrial conference about speeding ticket. So thank you for your service in your prior life, and thank you for what you do now. And you can introduce yourself and for the record, and please proceed.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Higdon and members of the BR Subcommittee on Transportation for having me here today. It's my pleasure to be here. I love nothing more than giving information out about projects and programs that are so near and dear to my heart. Oh, y'all didn't hear my first part, did you? Okay. I have a pretty big voice, so you can probably hear me anyway. But the reason I'm here, as you know, is to provide an overview of the revenue sharing program. Now, we have several pots of money, so I did a little bit on the front end of my presentation to explain to you the other pots of money we have. Now, y'all have been talking a lot about discretionary funds, but we'll get to that toward the end. I use the latter half for that, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to let me say this about the rule of fifths, and you're going to talk about that, the formula of fifths. It's one of those things in Frankfurt that's clear as mud. It's
Yes,
like
sir.
recallable nickels. It's like the House Bill 44 and our tax rates. And so it's clear as mud. It's very difficult to get your arm around the rule of fifths. But I know you're going to enlighten us all today, and we can better understand that, because it does take a bit of getting used to how we divide our transportation dollars. So sorry to interrupt you. Please proceed.
That's quite all right, sir. The revenue sharing program in the Department for Rural and Municipal Aid is a very exciting and beneficial program for all of our communities. You all know that because you hear from your judges and your mayors and, everyone, your citizens in your counties. This is a very big community service that's provided through the statutes. It's one in which my department and all the members in my department are happy to serve. I have learned from starting at KYTC that there are so many people there who are dedicated to public service, and that's been my life. So, and to each of you, I thank you so very much for being dedicated to public service. That's why I'm here. I'm here to serve my community, and I'm here to serve my Commonwealth. So we're going to start with the motor fuels tax receipts and translate that into how the revenues for cities and counties get to them. Okay? All right. The first thing I wanted to show you, though, was my very small little department within KYTC. Rural and municipal aid. What have we accomplished for all of our communities in 2021 so far? Okay, so July 1 through April the 12th was the date that I got this, or 17th, I got this information. In County Road Aid, we sent out $106.5 million. Municipal Road Aid, $9.7 million. In rural secondary construction, $77.8 million. In flex funds, and I'm going to tell you where each one of these comes from, okay? But flex funds, $20.9 million. In 80/20, $12.4 million. In County Road Aid emergency funds, $4.6 million. Now, just as a little aside, I want to tell you that as of May the 17th, we had County Road Aid emergency monies left of $74,000 because of all the, the rain and the ice storms and everything that's happened across the Commonwealth. That's where those emergency funds go. And that's why the discretionary funds are so important. So on the municipal road aid, we have $647,000. That's because we only have about 34 to 35% of municipalities in the state of Kentucky that join the co-op. And every time I've been speaking, I've been telling your county judges, tell your mayors that their municipalities should be a part of the co-op program. We'll talk just a minute about that too. And then discretionary funding, we've sent out $21.641 million for FY21. Total processed road aid in my small little department. And I can't tell you how proud I am of everybody in my department, because they work really hard and they do a really good job to get these projects pushed out because they know how important they are. So $254.462 million this fiscal year.
Commissioner, can I add something? I like to look at these figures in gas tax.
Yes, sir.
Gas tax equation or I guess conversions. 254 million is 8.5 cents.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
that'd be about right.
In gas tax, each penny of gas tax produces about $30 million to the road fund.
That is correct.
And another way to look at that, since this is revenue shared, it's only half of the money that we take in. So this is really about the equivalent of 16 cents a gallon. Will produce you 254 million because you only get half of it. So I just like to put that in perspective where our money is going. When you look at 26 cents, you can take what 17 cents, 8.5 is 17. You can take 17
right.
cents off of that, and that's where it goes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, the Office of Rural and Secondary Roads is where most of these monies are processed. So we'll start with that. Now, the revenue sharing breakdown. This is all statutory, as I said. The rural secondary allotment is contained in KRS 177-320, and the rural secondary portion of the pie for revenue share breakdown is 22.2%. And then you've got the county road aid allotment that's to your right. That's the same statute, and the counties are allotted 18.3% of the motor fuels tax for county roads. The municipal road aid allotment is a different statute, 177.36 or 366, and they get 7.7% of the motor fuels tax. Now, how do we determine who gets what? Well, that's the infamous, as Chairman Higdon said, the formula of the FIS. The formula of the FIS is also statutory, and that's how we divide it based on the statute that's been adopted by the legislature and how we're told to. The first fifth of the monies is an equal share. So every county gets 1/5 as an equal share. The second fifth is rural population of the county in relationship to the rural population of the state. And it may help if you look at the bottom, the municipal road aid allotment first, you take the population of the city divided by the statewide municipal population, okay? So city divided by total municipal population. It's the same kind of formula with the counties. So let's jump back up there. I hope I'm not getting too confusing by jumping back up. But the 1/5 rural population of the county in relationship to the total rural population of the state. So that's another 1/5. Then the third 1/5 is rural public road mileage of the county in relationship to total rural public road mileage of the state. And then 2/5 is the square mile rural area of the county in relationship to the total square mile rural area of the state. So those are 5/5, and that's how we do that. There's a specific little program in my department, and when we get the final numbers from the consensus forecasting group and the state budget office, then our financial wizard over at our office, her name's Robin Brewer, if you don't know her, and she's fantastic. But she takes those numbers and she tells our department what we have, and then we run it through this formula that imposes the formula of FIS. Okay? All right, let's go on to the next screen. Okay, 26 cents per gallon. Chairman Higdon just mentioned that. That 26 cents per gallon is almost precisely what it was in 2011, right, Chairman?
25.9 cents.
25.9, yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, and 1 cent per gallon equals $30 million. Okay, so by the time we run all these figures through the formula of FIS calculation, the motor fuels tax receipts that we are anticipating receiving in FY22, the tentative allocations, would be in the green is what's going to interest you the most. Okay, rural secondary road aid, 22.2% that I showed you earlier, $156 million and some change. County road aid, 18.3%, $129,053,000 and some change. Municipal road aid, 7.7%, and $54.3 million. So that's how we come up with the numbers that everyone gets. Oops. All right, the next slide. These colors mean something because our next slide is going to be all blue, okay? We've got the rural secondary in blue, the $156,557,000 that I just showed you. And then we've got the green, which is county road aid, the 18.3%. And then the yellow is municipal road aid. Now, let's talk about the county and the municipal first. Off the top of each one of these, there's 3% put in that emergency pot that I mentioned a while ago. 3% goes in that emergency pot. So for FY22, we're going to have around $3.8 million is what's anticipated. And I told you earlier that as of right now, we have $74,000 left. So you can see, and a lot of that's gone out since the first of the year. And we've done that quick. I don't know if any of your constituents have talked to you about that, but as commissioner, that's one of the things that I'm most proud of is our ability to process these, needs, these emergency needs as quickly as we do. So county and municipal, both of them have 3% that go into their emergency pots. Okay?
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
You said we're down to 74,000 in
Yes,
the
sir.
emergency fund. Will that refresh July 1, or is that does that 74,000 take us on into the next road all the way into 2023?
Well, what happens is, and I was going to explain this a little bit more, once we get these figures, they are, when we get to the co-op program, I was going to tell you that the 60% of these monies are going to go out to the counties to start with, and then 30 and 30, okay? And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. So does this refresh? Yes, it does. We'll have 74,000 is what we have right now, but we have emergency requests coming in every day. So by the end of the fiscal year, we're probably going to have 0. and it will be replenished when we get the first allotment of monies for the new fiscal year.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
All right, so that explains how we do the county and municipal road aid. But on the rural secondary side, we have the rural secondary emergency fund, and up to 6% goes into that. And then you'll see below it, to the right, there's the initial distribution, and that'll be on the next page. And then the emergency fund. We have state emergencies on rural secondary roads. There's 3% put in for that as well. And then you all have probably heard a lot about the 80/20 bridge program in your counties. That's where that money comes from, is out of the rural secondary breakdown. So we have 3% into that. On the state emergencies, I've detailed on here. I'm trying to stay at about a 5,000 foot view. So if you all have any questions, just let me know. On the county side, they send in the 80/20 bridge recommendations to our office. The requests are reviewed for available funding and eligibility and a need assessment concurrence from the district. Okay, because there's actually the 12 transportation districts in the Commonwealth. They all have chief district engineers, and then they have the engineering staff there. And they are very, very smart people, because I've had to talk to them on numerous occasions, and they're just delightful to talk to. And they always answer my questions. Okay, so let's go on to the next page. All right, so we're still in blue. So the initial breakdown, we've got maintenance and traffic over here, 57 or about 58 million for maintenance and traffic on rural secondary roads. Then we've got the county judge stipends. Those are statutory as well. The rural secondary lettings. I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit because I know that you're all wanting to get to the discretionary projects. So I'm not going to go into the weeds on the rural secondary lettings, but we anticipate having $75.4 million for rural secondary lettings this year. And as you saw already for FY21, what was it, 77 million? So anyway, flex funds. You all, I'm sure, heard from your constituents about flex funds, right? Flex funds this year are anticipated to be $27 million. The Division of Maintenance are the ones who go out and they look at the level of service ranking on these roads, on the rural secondary roads. And the level of service ranking criteria are on our slide here. They do rideability, appearance, if there's obstructions, etc., the fencing, guardrail, potholes, the striping, the signs. And I have to tell you all, if you haven't looked at some of the pictures, maybe sometime I can come back and bring some pictures for you. But I asked one of the engineers one day, I was like, I keep seeing this alligator cracking on these reports you send. Can you tell me what alligator cracking is? And they sent me a picture, and I was like, I see why it got its name. It looks just like the back of an alligator. So that I found that very interesting. So then when you look down to the tiers, you've got grades A, B, C, and D. And that determines how much flex funds go to the counties. So this sounds kind of, it took my mind a couple minutes to get around it, because you would think that the worse the county roads are, that the more money they would need, right? But this is not a statutory creation. Flex funds is a program that is created out of the cabinet. And we did that because the counties can flex their money back if they want to, because they meet with the chief district engineers in their district every year, and they can flex the money back or they can use it on their own roads. But if they flex their money back, the better the rural secondary roads are, the higher ranking they get and the more flex funds they get. Does that make sense? Yeah. I had to think about that one a little bit, but it does make sense when you think about it. You want your rural secondary roads to be really good because they're like your main arteries going into your blood vessels, right? Okay, so that's how the flex funds work. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the co-op program in itself, in case you all don't already know this. I said earlier that only about 34 to 35% of the municipalities belong to the co-op program or participate in it. And that was one of the main questions I had when I started there is why? I mean, we've got 400 and some municipalities in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Why don't they participate in this? So there's two ways you receive road aid monies. Even if you're not a member of the co-op program, you still get your road aid funds. But they come through the Department for Local Government monthly, which is fine. Or you join the cooperative program, which is through my department, and your distribution will be on a 60-30-10 schedule. So we'll do 60% of the anticipated allocations in August. And then we do 30% in the end of January. And then 10% is what we call the make-whole payment at the end of the fiscal year. So the make-whole payment is based on the actual receipts, not the tentative receipts, on the actual receipts. So your 10% at the end may end up being more. It just depends on the motor fuels tax. Okay? So that's why we call it the make-whole payment at the end. And that's generally how that's done. Now, why do I keep harping about municipalities joining the co-op program? Because if they don't join the co-op program, they're not entitled to emergency funds. Okay? And you have to be a member of the co-op program under the statute to be entitled to the emergency funds. Now, yes, you do pay that 3% up front, but if you have a big drain go out in the middle of the city, it's going to cost you $50,000 just right off the top. I mean, you all know that. I'm sure you've seen those bills and heard from your constituents. I mean, it's going to take a chunk of money to fix that. So there's really no reason why cities shouldn't join the co-op. On the emergency fund, we provided some pictures here for you. The 3% that's withheld for county and cities road aid, it's placed in a separate fund. For county emergencies and city emergencies, and the cities and the counties can apply for funding assistance throughout the year. It's used on a first-come, first-served basis, and we try to make sure that, if we've got $3.6 million, we're not going to go in there and build a $3 million bridge in one county. You see what I mean? We try to make sure that the money's spread around to all your districts, which is really the fair thing to do. And then the 80-20 match, that's the funding process for emergency fundings, meaning the state pays 80% and the municipality or the county pays 20%. This is how you submit your emergency request. This is a TC 2016, just FYI. All these forms are on the KYTC website under the Department for Rural and Municipal Aid. We ask that these be sent in with pictures and a cost estimate, and you can submit drainage structures if they're closed, a closed structure, if the posting load's lowered and school buses are having a hard time, if there's only one way in and one way out. All right, now to the topic that's been mentioned several times today, the discretionary funding. The discretionary funding is also statutory. It's under KRS 45247, called the Highway Construction Contingency Account, and it's administered through my department. The discretionary account receives an annual allocation of funds from the budget adopted by the legislature. For FY 2021, the initial allotment was $16.6 million, but $1.6 million of that comes off the top and goes to short line railroad assistance, and then $5 million goes to the Kentucky Pride Fund, leaving the department $10 million to assist with your needs. And this year, you all were gracious enough to add $10 million in House Bill 193, and you don't know how thankful we were. I was doing a jig when I found that out because I knew how many requests I had. And, you know, I really want to help people with their worst projects. I mean, I understand the fiduciary responsibilities of what I'm doing as well. But I also want to be able to help the people who are in need. And that was going to be pretty bad because we just didn't have the money to do it. So I thank you very much. And I know the secretary and everybody else in transportation thanks you for that as well. Comparatively, I did throw this in here just so y'all know. The amount allocated in the previous 4 years was $31 million, which was a net of $24.4 million, and it was decreased $14.4 million. Okay, what can discretionary funds be used for across the Commonwealth? Resurfacing, bridge replacement, intersection construction, economic and industrial development projects, safety and emergency issues, etc. And that is set out in 45247, which can be changed by the legislature in any cycle. So we just have to see how that goes and what you all tell us we can do with it, okay? Now, we also, discretionary funding projects require a higher threshold of need outside what is met through our other pots of money or our other programs, if you will. It's important to note that we do our best to make sure that all of the Office of Rural Secondary Road funding options are exhausted first, okay? Because we have the emergency pot, we have the 80-20 bridge program, we have flex funds. Flex funds have a lower threshold. Typically, when we talk numbers, flex funding requires like a 5 to 7, okay? Discretionary funding requires an 8 to a 10, okay? Now, you're looking at me just like I looked at this when I first started. I'm like, what is a 10? You know, I just don't know what a 10 is. What's it look like? Well, according to the district engineers that I've talked to, a 10 is the worst of the worst. You've got your road falling apart, base failures, alligator cracking, transverse cracking, and just all kinds of stuff. And you've patched it, and that's not working anymore. That's a 10, the worst of the worst. So that's the best way for me to describe it to you. And then we go on down the ladder. According to the chief district engineers, when we get to an 8, that's a road that's going to need something very soon, you know, within the next, 18 months or so. There's going to need to be some work done on these roads. They can be very hazardous. They can present safety issues, that kind of thing. So we like for people, when they submit their roads, to use flex funds for the ones that are, not as bad as the rest. That's why when I talk to county judges, I tell, yes, we have some discretionary funds, but please send me your worst roads. I want your worst roads in discretionary. Okay, when does a project qualify? The project presents a hazardous condition as assessed by the Chief District Engineer's offices of your district. The project promotes economic or industrial development, and it's related to safety or emergency issues. How is this processed? Well, who can apply? County judge executives, mayors, state representatives, state senators, and some select state road personnel even apply. We ask that you use the mile point assistance map that's also on our website. The mile point assistance map, if you've never looked at it, is just a modern technological miracle as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you can really go on there and tag your roads, and you can, go down like Google Earth. You can look at it, you can see it, and we know where the road is. Okay, so like Chairman Higdon referred to a bridge to nowhere a while ago. We don't want to end up paving somebody's driveway now, do we?
Do you have that on a map, the bridge to nowhere?
I sure hope not. Okay, so when the requests come in, we ask that they come in with a cost estimate. You can email them, snail mail them, and hand carry them. I even met a judge executive at the beginning of COVID. He wanted to hand carry his request, and I met him in the parking garage. So that was pretty cool. Once we get it, we're going to log it in, and we're going to send it out to the Chief District Engineer's office, and then they have designated personnel within their office that's going to go out to each county, and they're going to review the roads. They're going to look at them and see what the condition of it is, if there's base failures, etc. And they're going to send it back to us with a needs assessment ranking. Once we get it back, then we put it, my executive advisor, Gail Smith, she keeps a wonderful master log of these. It's amazing. I can sort them by, tens. If I want to see the worst roads in the Commonwealth that have applied for funding, I can do that. And it's totally amazing. So she updates that, and then she goes through and checks all of them. To check and make sure the mile points are accurate, that we're on a county road, that it's every county road should have a number. So she goes through and checks all of that. Then once we get all of that together, then we try to go through it and get the worst roads so that we're getting, pardon the analogy, but the most bang for your buck, you all want us to use that money most efficiently and productively as possible. So when we're looking through them, we're looking at the number of the most economic impact for the number of businesses, the number of homes, the number of your constituents that are going to be helped. That's all the considerations that go into that. So I'm at the end of what I had prepared. If you have questions of me, I am certainly willing to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find it out.
Commissioner, I want to give everybody a clue. Look on the last page, and your cell number's there.
It is.
And that means you want them to call you if you
Absolutely.
have questions. So,
I answer my phone all the time, too.
so that's a clue.
I learned that from Kenny Bishop.
All of you all that don't have that number, please write it down, because you will get if your county judge hasn't called you about discretionary money yet, they will, and this is the phone number that you need to check that out. I do have one question. I don't
Yes,
know if
sir.
anybody else has any or not. We're going to wrap this up pretty quick. We got another meeting coming in. Kentucky Pride Fund.
Yes, sir.
Explain that to the committee, because it briefly, if you will.
Well, the Kentucky Pride Fund, all I know is that the Kentucky Pride Fund gets like $5 million off the top of the discretionary funds. And if you all want to jump in here, if you know more about the Kentucky Pride
I'll
Fund.
say something about it.
Yes, sir.
It goes way back to I think that it used to be picked up by another cabinet, and somehow we inherited it. And we talk about tax expenditures and money. We talked about it yesterday. We're going to have a lot of discussions about money that comes out of the transportation fund that really should be picked up by someone else. So we're going to have those discussions as we go forward. This has been very elementary and very good, and we appreciate you all. Just I know for myself as a new chairman, and for the new members, and even some, I've been here a long time, and some of this, it helps me better understand it. So
Sure.
I appreciate you all taking the time and making this very, very easy to understand, and hopefully all of our members, it was beneficial to everybody. I didn't see anybody get up and leave early, so that means that they weren't bored, and we appreciate that. Any questions from anybody on the committee? Good deal. Our next meeting is July the 7th. Chairman Santoro will be in charge, and I don't know what good things we'll talk about, but as we prepare for the budget, this is all good stuff. So again, thank you all for the valuable information today. Motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.
Thank you all very much. And if you need me to come back and go from 5,000 feet to 2,500, just let me know. It's right there on the screen. 502-892